Hello, and welcome to the Delaware Blogger Podcast. Now, this is where we share podcasting pointers and tips for new podcast hosts over the age of 50. That's right, boomers and beyond. I'm your host, Antionette Blake, and today we're going to talk about the basics of starting a podcast. Now, podcasting is a wonderful way to share your voice, your passion, your vision, your expertise with the world because we have so much knowledge. It's a great way to connect with an audience and it's fun too. But how do you get started? What do you need to do to create a podcast? And what are some of the best practices for podcasting? Well, in this episode, I'm answering those questions and more, and I'm going to guide you through the steps of launching your own podcast, whether you're doing it for fun or for business or even for both. This episode is going to help you get started on the right track. Now, let's begin with the first question. What do you need to do to create a podcast? Well, the good news is you don't need a lot of fancy equipment or even fancy software to start a podcast. In fact, you can start with just 4 things: a microphone, a computer, recording software, and a hosting platform. That's right. Now, you guys have been following me for a bit. You'll say, well, she's talked about this before. Well, it's a new year and a new audience. And I want to talk to my boomers and beyond. Not that I'm pushing my millennials away or my other Gen Xers or Y and A, B, C, D, E, F, G. But you know what? We have so much knowledge and information that it's best to get it out there. We want to put this out there. We got more years in behind us than we have in front of us. So I want to be here with you to help you start the podcast. So let's begin. A microphone. The microphone is the most important piece of equipment for podcasting. Why? Because it captures your voice. It makes it sound clear and professional. Now, you don't have to spend a lot of money on a microphone, but you do need to choose one that fits your needs and your budget. And I'm going to continue emphasizing the word your because this is your podcast. Now, there are different types of microphones. There's USB microphones, XLR microphones, and dynamic microphones. Now, there's advantages and disadvantages for all. But for beginners, I recommend using a USB microphone. Why? It's easy, affordable, and compatible with most computers. And some of the popular USB mics I actually started out with was the Blue Yeti mic. There's the Audio Technica. There's Samsung, but right now I'm using the Shure MV7 microphone, and this is my favorite thus far. So you got your mic, right? Now you need the computer. The computer is what you're going to be using to record, edit, and upload your podcast episodes. You can use any computer that you have as long as it has enough storage space, memory, and processing power to handle your podcast files. It could be a laptop, a tablet, or even your smartphone. But it needs to be reliable, secure, and able to run the software and connect to the internet. Recording, that's the third piece of this. Recording software is the program that you're going to use to record, edit your podcast episodes. Like there's a lot of software options out there, both free and paid. Some have more features than others, but when you're just starting out, Audacity, that's what I use. GarageBand is another one. Adobe Audition, there's others out there, but Audacity for beginners is great. It's free, easy to use, and it's compatible with most operating systems. And Audacity allows you to record, edit, and export your podcast episodes in different formats, whether it's an MP3 or a WAV file. So that's what you want to make sure that you have the right recording software. The fourth piece is the hosting platform, right? This is where you're going to store and distribute your podcast episodes to your listeners. The hosting platform provides you with the podcast feed, the RSS feed, the real simple syndication feed. That's the link that contains all the information about your podcast, the title, the description, the cover art, the files, right? The podcast feed, the RSS feed, is what you're going to submit to the podcast directories like Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and so forth. And this is where the listeners go to listen and subscribe to your podcast. There are a lot of podcasting platforms available, both free and paid. And depending on your hosting platform, they'll upload to the various ones. But if they don't, you can always submit your RSS feed to the smaller directories and any other directory that they don't cover, like iHeartRadio. So that's why you need that hosting platform. And again, I use Buzzsprout, but they have Podbean, Anchor for Spotify. Anchor used to be Spotify, Transistor. There's a bunch of them out there. But for newbies, I recommend, if you want to go paid, Buzzsprout. I'll leave you the affiliate link to my Buzzsprout account in the show notes. But Spotify for podcasters is free and easy to use. It's really easy to walk. I can walk you through it. And remember, I also have the Podcasting Your Purpose resource guide. I'm going to leave the link to that as well, because that is a great tool and a resource to help you start and grow your show. Now, those are the 4 things that you needed to create a podcast: a microphone, a computer, recording software, and a hosting platform. And of course, there are other things that you can add to your setup. You can add a mixer, a pop filter, sound card, even headphones. I used to use headphones. I have headphones, but I don't really use them. A microphone stand, arms, acoustic tiles. There's a lot more. But when you're first starting out, you want to make sure that you can get it right and tight. So now that you know what you need to create a podcast, let's move on to the second question. How do I create a podcast? Well, the process is going to be divided into 5 steps. And there's actually 4 P's, like that insurance company. I'm not going to name names because they don't sponsor the show. But the 5 steps is planning, recording, editing, publishing, and promoting. That's right. So let's start with planning. Planning is the first step. This is where you're going to decide what your podcast is about, who your target market audience is, your podcast name, and the format, as well as how often you're going to be releasing new episodes, weekly or bi-weekly, never monthly. You do it once a month, people tend to forget about you. Planning is important. It helps you stay focused. It defines your goals, your niche, your brand. Planning helps you prepare your content. It helps you with your topics, your titles, your descriptions, your scripts, your outlines, even your guests, if you're bringing on guests. So planning is the foundation of your podcast. So make sure you spend enough time and effort on this step. Grab that calendar, whether it's a handwritten calendar, or a digital calendar. Put in the date that you're going to be publishing, the dates that you're going to be recording, the date you're going to be releasing. Plan it out. Put your titles, your topics, all that good stuff in there, because that's going to help you stay organized. And that's going to be handy when life happens. My friend says, life be life. And yes, things are going to happen. So once you've got all the planning down, the next step is recording. This is actually when you're going to record your podcast episodes using your microphone and your recording software. And you know what? Recording can be frustrating, but this is the most fun part of podcasting, because this is where you get to share your voice, your passion, your expertise to the world. But it requires some skills and techniques, such as speaking clearly, using proper intonation, trying to avoid those filler words, but you know what? That is natural for us. So don't try to edit them out. You want to maintain consistent audio quality and make sure that you practice. Practice, progress, because that is going to help to improve your recording skills. Yeah, this is episode number 64. I bet you if you go back and listen to episode 1, even episode 64, you'd be like, oh my God, that was terrible. But practice, progress. The third step is editing. This is where you're going to polish it up and clean it up. You're going to use your software, your this is where you're going to use Audacity or GarageBand to clean it up. This is going to be the most tedious part of podcasting, especially if you're very particular. So, schedule time that you can edit your show. You don't need to cut out all the ums and the ahs and the pauses, but if there's something like a coughing fit, or you had to get up and, use the facilities or whatever, you want to cut all that out. You may want to even add music. You go to YouTube, free podcast music. Just make sure you cite the source. Sound effects, intro, your outro, your transition. Editing helps the podcast. So make sure that you edit your podcast carefully and creatively. Yeah, whatever, that word. And then the final step is publishing. That's right. Publishing is where you're going to upload your podcast episode to your hosting platform. You're going to submit your podcast feed to the directories if they don't do it for you. If your hosting platform doesn't do it, most of them do to maybe 3 or 4, but you can also add to as many as you want. Like I said, iHeartRadio, even Amazon Audible. So this is the fun part, getting it out there, publishing it, because you can talk all day, but this is where you're going to make your podcast available and accessible to your listeners. And publishing requires a few steps and procedures. So you want to choose your file format. Most times it's an MP3. You're going to create your cover art, unless you have one standard one or you want to change it up. I change mine up with each episode, and I just simply use Canva, and I created my cover art, but that's where I changed the titles and the episode numbers. Verifying you have that podcast feed. Once it's there and it's uploaded, publishing will distribute it. And once you publish it, it's great. It's easy breezy, becomes consistent, and it's just like rinse and repeat. So you want to get that down. But promoting, yes, this is that P, that final P. This is where you're going to market your podcast to your potential listeners and to your subscribed listeners. This is what's going to grow your podcast audience. And please don't allow those download numbers to discourage you. It takes time. Promoting is the most difficult and the most challenging part of podcasting, because this is where you have to compete with millions of other podcasters to stand out from the crowd. And promotion involves various strategies, various channels, social media, email, word of mouth, newsletters, guest appearances on other shows. Speaking of which, I'm going to be on not a new podcast, but I'm going to be a guest on another podcast coming up soon. And I just interviewed with one of my clients, Adam, who is launching his podcast, and we did a mock interview. It was great. I'll share that next week, the mock interview that I had with Adam. But there are, things that you need to do with promotion. It's going to expand your podcast base. And so make sure that when you're promoting it, you're doing it effectively, authentically, and consistently. It's never one and done. A show comes out on Saturday at 10, but you got to keep repeating it at least once or twice or 3 times a month. Okay. So those are the 5 steps of creating a podcast: planning, recording, editing, publishing, and promoting. Now there's steps and details for each, and you can learn more about them by listening to this podcast or visiting my blog, delblogger.com, ordering my book, Podcasting Your Purpose, or simply sending me an email and ask for that 7-step checklist for starting a podcast. I'll get it to you in a swiftness. I'll leave my email address as well. Hope that this episode has given you just a general overview of the basics of starting a podcast. And if you're over the age of 50 and you want to start a podcast, don't let anything stop you. We need to leave our legacy. Podcasting is a wonderful way to express ourselves, to share our wisdom, and connect with our community. It's not just the young people, it's boomers and beyond. You have a unique voice, a valuable perspective, and a powerful message. The world needs to hear us. So go ahead and start your podcast today. You'll be totally amazed by the results. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Delaware Blogger Podcast, and I hope that you enjoyed it and learned something new. And if you did, leave a review and share it with your family. your bae and your boo. Don't forget, subscribe so you won't miss next episode. I'm going to be sharing podcasting pointers every Saturday at 10 a.m. And if you're a new podcast host over the age of 50 and you need some more information, let me know. Until then, happy podcasting.